Hi Terry, this is Yuba from your Codenames game, and I just couldn't figure out how to type out an explanation that would really work. So I'm just making this quick video so that I can really illustrate what I'm trying to say. I make videos like this all the time for my online class, so it just is for me a very instinctive way to try to explain a visual concept. So please bear with me as I try to go through the steps that I was trying to explain in typing during the game. So here we go. I've copied the image of our game at the point where we are right now. Obviously, when you start a game, all the squares are sort of yellow. But right now, we're actually nearing the end of the game, and many of the squares are colored. But I figured I'd go ahead and use this since it's the one you've probably been thinking about for quite a while. In this kind of mirrors game, we are told that our axis of symmetry is diagonal. That means we only have two possible axes of symmetry for the game. One that goes from upper left to lower right, and the other that goes from upper right to lower left. So early in the game, the big challenge is to figure out which of these two axes is the one that we will be using for our team. Sometimes both teams use the same axis. Sometimes they use different axes. But at the beginning of the game, I spend most of my energy trying to figure out which one is mine, which is the one that my team is thinking about. In this game, it turns out that our axis is the one that goes from upper left to lower right. At this point, you might be wondering, well, how do I know that the axis that is our team's is the one that goes from upper left to lower right? So let me show you how I can tell in this example. I can tell that that's our axis by looking at what I consider pairs of squares. I'm going to call them squares instead of agents because that's the way I think of them. But I'm going to be comparing matched pairs, symmetrically matched pairs on opposite sides of the green, or the one that doesn't work. I'm going to be showing you how these pairs don't match across the green axis. So I'm going to focus on the negative, how I can prove that it's not green, rather than trying to convince you that it is pink. So here we go. And I'm going to start in the upper right corner and look at what I consider to be pairs that need to match to keep the symmetry in line. And so the first pair is right there tucked up in that upper right corner where we see a blue square and a red square directly mirror images across the green line. See how they don't match? If this was symmetrical around the green line, which just meant that if you took it and folded it along that green line, they would match up, you can see we have a red on one side and a blue on the other. Not a match. That right there is enough to prove that the green line can't be our axis of symmetry. Now, I never like to trust myself with a single example, so I look for more. And as I go down towards the lower left or towards the middle of our diagram, I see several more examples where the pairs don't match up. Here's a couple more examples. Now, just because as you're going along, you may find some that do match. That's just coincidence. That's why I focus on finding ones that don't match, because one pair that doesn't match proves that that can't be our symmetry axis. Several pairs that do match are not conclusive. So I always focus on proving what it can't be, and whatever is left over is what it must be. So now that we know that the pink axis of symmetry is the one that we're going to be using for the rest of this game, it's time to go in and look at what information we already have about our relationship and what we already know about our pairs along this axis. So let's go and see if there are any pairs that we actually already have both members identified. And when I look at this screen, I actually only see a single pair where we have already recognized and identified both members of that pair. Now, the farther you get away from the axis of symmetry, the harder it is to recognize that something is a pair. And these are separated by one square, but they still match each other. If you were to fold this on the diagonal across that pink line, these two blue squares would overlap with each other. So we know they're still a matching pair. There's several other blue squares, though, that we've identified. So we must be able to go in and find their partner, which will give us some clues about ones that we will be able to say automatically are ours. So let's look for some of those. So here's a blue square that you've already captured because of the clues. But when you look across the axis to its partner on the other side, right? So this one is touching the axis on one corner. So its partner is actually going to touch the axis on a corner as well, directly across, sort of butterfly wings from that one. We can see that the blue square labeled jeweler must be blue. Now, on your version, this is still yellow. Because I'm the spy master, I get to see that it's already blue, so that makes it obvious. But even if it were yellow, we would know it had to be blue because it matches up with this one that we've already identified. Here's another pair where we have one blue square sitting right near the axis, which makes it easier to identify. So it's blue and it's touching the axis, so we just flip across the axis and see that angel has to be blue as well. So those two examples were fairly straightforward because they're right on the axis. But we've got one that's a little trickier because they're farther away. So look in the very upper right of the diagram. You see the blue lady up there near the upper right. When you go down to the lower left, she actually matches, if you follow the diagonal down across the axis, see that she matches up or is paired up with the clue roll. Because of that, we know that roll has to be blue. I know you can see it's blue because you're looking at the Spy Masters version. But in yours, blue roll would be yellow, but you would still know it had to be blue because it's the partner of that lady up in the upper right corner. We have now identified 3 squares that at the very start of your next turn, you can go in and just click on them without having to think at all. You've already done the analysis. And we know that angel, roll, and jeweler, all 3 have to be blue just because they match their partner, blue partner on the other side of the diagonal. That's great. That means you've got 3 automatically correct guesses at the very start of your next turn. And I really recommend going in and doing them first, because that way if you make a wrong guess on something, you haven't lost the opportunity to go ahead and let your partner know that you recognize that those are blue. This means that we now only have 1 pair left to identify. Now here in the Spy Master's view, it's pretty obvious because they're colored blue. On yours, they're yellow. But as long as your Spy Master gives you a clue that matches one or the other of those 2 words, you'll be able to automatically identify the one on the other side of the grid that matches it. So that's really what you need to know about the symmetry and the matching pairs. Now, I'm lucky. I really think in pictures, and visual images mean a lot to me. But I've taught long enough to know that not everybody finds it as easy to see the symmetry and the patterns as I do. So let me just take a minute and back away from this particular grid that we have and just show you sort of the general pattern to help you see the symmetry that I keep talking about. So here we go. Starting from the upper left, we have a number of squares that are along the diagonal, along the axis. So they are not going to match up with anything else. They don't have a partner. They stand alone. So all of these squares that I'm highlighting in pink are the axis. They stand alone. They don't have a partner. But starting then in the upper left corner, I'm going to start highlighting in different colors the pairs, so that as I work from the upper left to the lower right, you can hopefully start to see more clearly the symmetry that goes along with this. When it's all reds and blues and yellows and blacks, it's hard to see that. But I'm going to ignore the reds and blues and yellows and black and just show you which ones would match along this pink axis of symmetry. See the pattern here as we did the first batch right closest to the axis of symmetry? Right? It's really pretty easy. These are the ones I think of the butterfly wings. They actually touch each other right across that axis. So now it's time to move 1 step farther away from the axis and look at those pairs. Hopefully the pattern is starting to become more obvious as we're getting rid of some of the details of the original game. And you can see this pattern going across the axis. Now this set was a little farther away. The original ones that I showed you that were closest to the axis actually touched at their corners. This set, which is 1 step further away, has 1 square, 1 pink square separating the 2 members of the pair. Hopefully by now you can predict what the next part of the pattern is going to be as we move out yet 1 step farther away from the axis. We've only got 3 squares on each side here. And you can see that they are now each separated from each other by an entire pair of clues. For me, that was the hard part. As we get close to the other corners, it's easier for me to match the pieces up again. And so here we go. Last little bit of the process, matching in the corner pieces of our pattern. That's it. We can see the whole pattern now, but now it's so complicated it's hard to tell what's going on. So I'm going to start removing the arrows and just leaving the colors, hoping that that more simplified pattern makes sense to you. I don't know if this helps, and I didn't really talk much about how you identify the clues along the axis, except to say that they just stand alone and you have to figure them out on your by themselves. But like I said, you do have the same number of your agents along the axis as the other team has along theirs. So remember, their axis may be different, but if you can tell they have 2 on their axis, you know you're going to have 2 on yours. Right? Hope this helps.